Hello, let's talk about money. What is money? Is it the currency bills, the financial instruments that we see? Is that money? Is there something else behind these outer manifestations of what we ordinarily understand as money? What is the right attitude we should have towards money? Are there some insights, wisdom we can gather from our rich cultural tradition of India, which are still relevant today in terms of what should be our right attitude towards money? And why are we even talking about money on a platform that is dedicated to inner growth, personal self-development? Is there any connection between money as a force and the self-development both of the individual and community and societies? So in this and following videos, we'll be taking up some of these questions. So let's first do a quick survey of what our cultural tradition has to say about money. One of the first things we must recognize is that Indian culture has had a very rich evolutionary model of human development, which has been developed over several millennia. And as per this model of human development, it has been fully recognized, our ancient seers and sages have recognized this, that the first urges and the first requirements or needs that human beings have correspond to the fulfillment of their needs and desires and urges and impulses that come from what is known as human ego. And so they came up with this model of Purusharthas, this system of Purusharthas, where they recognized and gave legitimacy to 4 kinds of needs that human beings have. And corresponding to that are the 4 pursuits in life that people have. They call this as Purushartha, the pursuits, the goals towards which we make effort. So the first one is the fulfillment of our material and physical needs. And they call this Artha. This is the fulfillment of all economic needs, the physical needs, the material well-being that we all want. The second is the fulfillment of the vital, emotional, aesthetic desires. That's what they called it as Kama. Then there is a higher mental being in us, a higher moral being in us, which looks for or which seeks for the right order of things, the right law of living, the right law of personal growth. That, and it also seeks for higher ideals to hold on to as it moves through life. They call this as Dharma. And finally, the pursuit of spiritual liberation, spiritual perfection, the seeking of the spirit as it is often called. That's the moksha. In this video, and as I said in the subsequent video, our focus will be on the very first need, the Artha. And we'll take a look at what our tradition has to say about different attitudes that we can have towards this Artha need, this Artha Purushartha. Before I speak about what our traditions say about the attitudes towards Artha, it's also important to see that the 4 Purusharthas, the Artha, Kama, Dharma and Moksha, they correspond to the physical, emotional, mental and spiritual parts of our being. So you see how complete and integral this model of human development is, that is part of our cultural tradition. So let's focus on this wealth, this attitude towards Artha, this attitude towards material well-being, and take a look at what our traditions have to say about it. So before we do that, what does Artha mean? There can be 2 ways to look at it. One is Artha means material well-being. The well-being, progress and prosperity, both of the individual and the collective, society, nation, humanity. And the second is Artha. This Sanskrit word also means instruments. And that's where the idea of money as an instrument comes in. That it is an instrument that helps one fulfill the material well-being of individual as well as the collective. But as we proceed further, we'll see that maybe there is something else behind the instrument. But we'll come to that as we proceed. Going back to our cultural tradition, broadly we can say that there have been two attitudes. We can say that two broad attitudes that we find reflected in various scriptures, various texts that we look at from our tradition. And they may seem on the surface a little bit contradictory, paradoxical to each other. But if we go deeper, we find that both these attitudes actually help us get a more complete picture. And they both have their roots in what we call as the dharmic nature of Indian civilization. So together they complete the picture. Regarding the first attitude, let me take a couple of examples. One from the Mahabharata, which, as we know, is a great inquiry into human condition, all aspects of human condition. So in the Mahabharata, we find actually both these attitudes. The first one is where wealth is regarded as the first condition, not only for a happy and dignified, sophisticated family life, but also equally necessary for a stable social order. This is important to note. It's not only personally, individually, on our individual family level that we should be seeking wealth, but wealth should be sought for so that society also has a sense of stability in it. It has a very interesting component if you think deeply about it. And in this category of attitudes, it's also mentioned several times in the Mahabharata, in several dialogues, that wealth is also required. Artha is also a precondition for dharma, for the right order of living, individually and for the collective dharma, for the dharma of the kingdom itself, so that everything is properly and ethically done. And not only that, Artha is also required for the final pursuit in life, which is the moksha, that is the pursuit of spiritual liberation, spiritual release. So as it's often commonly said in Hindi, bhukhe pet bhajan na hoye. So it's kind of like that. Even for higher goals in life, our earlier goals in life should be met. In modern psychology, this was also transferred as, or this was also understood as the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But in Indian tradition, as we'll see, we go deeper and deeper into that. So there is one particular dialogue between Bhim and Yudhishthir, where Bhim reminds Yudhishthir that dharma is the foundation of this world. Agreed. And there is nothing of greater value than dharma. But undoubtedly, dharma also requires money. So, dharma is a factor in how we generate wealth. Wealth should also be generated through dharmic ways, through dharmic means, through right means. But wealth must be grasped to secure the ends of dharma. Mahabharata, if we go down to a little bit more popular literature that came out in our tradition to teach niti, the right policy to kings and princes and children in the royal families who will be given charge to govern kingdoms, to govern societies. So, for example, the text like Panchtantra, which is attributed to Vishnu Sharma, which is a collection of fables, short stories told to the princes to teach them Niti Shastra, the policy. So, in this particular story, author Vishnu Sharma says, this is being told to the princes in the form of a story. There is nothing in the world that cannot be obtained through wealth. So let a prudent man, see, this is about niti, the prudent policy. Let a prudent man therefore earn wealth by his effort. Let's continue further with this study of our survey of what our tradition has to say. Come to 20th century and the great Mahayogi of our times, Sri Aurobindo. What does he say about the right attitude towards money. He says, I'll read his own words, the acceptance of poverty is noble and beneficial in an individual or a class, but it becomes fatal and it pauperizes life. It makes life poorer. It pauperizes life of its richness and expansion if it is perverted into a general or national ideal. Very interesting and very important. As an individual, I may say, yeah, I want to live with very limited means, with very limited wealth, just enough to fulfill my most basic needs and not worry about tomorrow. As an individual, I can take this ideal. But when I make this into a national ideal, he says it becomes very perverted and it's actually very dangerous for the society or a nation. And then he reminds us that as long as our ancient India had this ideal of vast riches and vast spending, India was one of the greatest of the nations. And then somehow this tendency which glorified asceticism, which glorified letting go of material pursuits, when this tendency took hold of the Indian mind, our degradation started. So these are some very important things to keep in mind. This is still about the first category of attitude that we see in our tradition. And Sri Aurobindo also speaks about, he gives the example of Ramayana and how Rishi Valmiki portrayed what should be the ideal state of a society or even humanity. And he paints this beautiful picture of the rich and mighty Ayodhya, the great land that Ayodhya was, where everybody lived a rich and prosperous life. And Sri Aurobindo points this out, that Rishi Valmiki, when he gave us a vision, an image, a picture of ideal society, it not only included justice and enlightened state policies, it also included things like universal education, high morality, high seeking of spirituality. And at the same time, in Rishi Valmiki's vision, we also see that there was no one in Ayodhya who went without good food, who went without a house which also included a reasonable garden, who went without a reasonable accumulation of luxuries of life. So this was the ideal state, the ideal society, the vision of ideal society that has been painted by our great rishis like Valmiki, and Sri Aurobindo reminds us of that. So this has been the first category of attitude that we find in our ancient traditions. Then in the next video, we'll take a look at what is the second attitude that has been there in our Indian tradition. And then we'll explore how the two are integrated, and then we'll bring a little bit more deeper insight from Sri Aurobindo on the nature of money. Thank you so much.